My hands trembled as I stared at the job application on my screen. The name Scott Turner, my brother who hadn't spoken to me in years, jumped out like a slap. 12 years I'd kept my success secret from my family, who laughed when I left Wall Street to waste my finance degree on silly app ideas. Now they thought I was still a struggling freelancer, barely making rent in my modest apartment in Seattle. Little did they know, I was Deanne Turner, the anonymous founder of TechVision, a Fortune 200 company worth $4.8 billion. Growing up in Appleton, Wisconsin, I learned early that the Turner family valued practicality above all else. My father, Thomas, a bank manager for 30 years, and my mother, Linda, an elementary school teacher, had clear ideas about what constituted a respectable career. My brother Scott followed their blueprint perfectly. 4 years at University of Wisconsin, accounting degree, then climbing the corporate ladder at a respected firm in Chicago. I started out on that path too. Finance degree from Northwestern, landing a coveted position on Wall Street. For 3 years, I excelled. But deep down, I saw inefficiencies in how businesses operated. I had ideas for software that could revolutionize enterprise management. My notebooks filled with concepts and designs for what would eventually become TechVision. When I called my parents to tell them I was quitting my secure 6-figure job to pursue entrepreneurship, the response was immediate and harsh. Deanne Elizabeth Turner, have you completely lost your mind? Mom's voice had that specific pitch reserved for when she thought I was making a catastrophic mistake. People would kill for your position. Dad was more calculated. Honey, the statistics on startup failures are overwhelming. This is financial suicide. But it was the family dinner during Christmas that same year that truly showed me where I stood. I'd been excitedly explaining my business concept when Scott interrupted. This is exactly why women are underrepresented in leadership positions, he said, winking at our father. Too emotional about their little projects instead of making sensible decisions. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to defend me. No one did. Instead, Mom patted my hand consolingly. Sweetheart, why can't you be practical like your brother? He just got promoted to senior analyst and bought that beautiful townhouse. Not everyone has what it takes, Scott added, sipping his beer. Nothing wrong with accepting your limitations, Dee. 2 days later, they staged what they called an intervention. I walked into the living room to find my parents, Scott, and even my Aunt Judy sitting solemnly, expressions grave as if attending a funeral. We're worried about you, Dad began. This entrepreneur fantasy has gone too far. Scott had prepared a PowerPoint presentation titled Reality Check: Why Deanne Should Return to Financial Security, complete with graphs showing startup failure rates and a detailed budget of how quickly my savings would deplete. If you persist with this delusion, Scott concluded with the smug confidence of someone who believed his business degree made him infallible, you'll be calling us for money within 6 months. And frankly, I'm not sure we should enable your poor judgment by helping. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight them anymore. I wouldn't try to convince them. Instead, I would show them by succeeding. But I wouldn't tell them when it happened. Let them believe what they wanted. The next morning, I announced I'd reconsidered and would be looking for traditional jobs again. The relief on their faces was palpable. My mother hugged me, whispering, "You've made the right choice." A week later, I moved to Seattle, telling them I'd found work as a freelance web designer, a career they considered marginally acceptable, though unstable. In reality, I was beginning to build TechVision with my life savings. 3 months of living on ramen noodles and working 20-hour days led to my first breakthrough. My prototype for enterprise resource management software caught the attention of a venture capitalist at a tech meetup I'd almost been too exhausted to attend. "This is revolutionary," she said after my demonstration. "Would you be open to discussing a seed investment?" 2 weeks later, I secured $1 million in funding. I called my parents that night but said nothing about it. Instead, I listen to them worry about whether I was eating properly and suggest that it's never too late to apply for a proper position at a bank. "Thanks for worrying about me," I said. "But I'm doing fine. I just landed a decent-sized web design project." "Well, that's good to hear," Dad replied, the relief in his voice tinged with lingering disappointment. "Maybe you can start building a client base." After hanging up, I looked around my tiny apartment, at the whiteboard, filled with the architecture for what would become a billion-dollar platform, and whispered to myself, "Just you wait." 3 years flew by as TechVision grew from a 3-person operation in a cramped office to a 50-employee company with our own floor in a downtown Seattle building. Our enterprise software was being implemented by mid-sized companies across the West Coast, and we were catching the attention of industry analysts. Maintaining my cover story became increasingly complicated. I developed an entire second life designed specifically for my family's occasional visits and our video calls. I rented a modest 1-bedroom apartment in an unremarkable neighborhood that I kept solely for appearances, while actually living in a spacious condominium overlooking Elliott Bay. My best friend from college, Grace Matthews, moved to Seattle to become TechVision's chief operating officer and the only person who knew about my double life. She thought I was crazy but respected my decision. "Your commitment to this secret is both impressive and concerning," she told me one night as we celebrated landing our first Fortune 500 client. "Don't you think it's time to show them who you really are?" I swirled my champagne, watching the bubbles rise. "You weren't there, Grace. You didn't see how they looked at me. Like I was delusional." "No. They don't get to know. Until I'm so successful, they can't possibly dismiss it." Grace raised an eyebrow. "And when will that be, exactly? We just signed a 7-figure contract. Your net worth is already in 8 figures. "Not yet," I said firmly. "Not until we're undeniable." The charade required elaborate planning. When flying home for holidays, I booked economy class in case someone I knew saw my itinerary, but flew private for business. I maintained 2 sets of wardrobes, designer clothes for my real life, and deliberately modest attire for family events. I even created a fake portfolio website for my supposed freelance business that I updated just enough to be convincing. My parents continued to send me care packages and occasional checks to help with the rent, which I quietly donated to women's entrepreneurship programs. Every time my mother called to ask if I was still doing okay with that freelance thing, I bit my tongue and assured her I was managing, even as I signed off on multi-million-dollar contracts. The summer after TechVision hired our 500th employee, I attended a family reunion at my parents' lake house. Scott arrived late, making a show of his entrance, his new luxury car parked prominently in the driveway. "Sorry for the delay," he announced to the assembled relatives. "Had to wrap up some details on a major acquisition our company is making." He loosened his tie with practiced casualness. "Just got promoted to vice president of operations at Tecton Systems." My uncle whistled appreciatively. "Moving up in the world, Scott? Always knew you'd make us proud." I nearly choked on my lemonade. Tecton Systems had just been acquired by a TechVision subsidiary the previous week. I'd personally reviewed the integration plan, including a significant restructuring of their operations division. Scott sidled up to me by the snack table, a beer in hand. "So, Dee? Still making websites for local coffee shops?" "Something like that," I replied, fighting to keep my expression neutral. "You know," he lowered his voice conspirationally, "Tecton might need some basic web work. I could put in a word, throw you a bone. Nothing too complicated, of course." I bit the inside of my cheek hard. "That's thoughtful, Scott, but I'm actually pretty booked up right now." He laughed, the sound grating. "Come on, we both know beggars can't be choosers in the gig economy. Don't be proud." Later that evening, as relatives shared updates about their lives, my mother gently prompted me. "Deanne, tell everyone about your web design business." All eyes turned to me with that specific blend of pity and concern reserved for the family disappointment. I considered for one wild moment telling them all the truth, that I employed over 500 people, that our software powered operations for companies they used every day, that my struggling business was worth over $300 million. Instead, I smiled modestly. It's going well. I have some regular clients now. It's steady. That's nice, dear. Aunt Judy patted my knee. Stability is important. Not everyone needs to be an overachiever like Scott. Scott raised his beer in a mock toast. Speaking of which, did I mention Tecton was just acquired by a subsidiary of TechVision? Big news in the industry. Their CEO is some mysterious figure who never appears publicly. Probably some trust fund kid who got lucky with daddy's money and now pays other people to do the real work. The irony was so acute I had to excuse myself to the bathroom, where I leaned against the sink and laughed until tears streamed down my face. That night, I made a decision. I would remain anonymous as TechVision's founder and CEO, using a trusted male executive as our public face. My secret would continue until I was ready to reveal it on my own terms. What I didn't realize then was how much longer and how much more complicated this double life would become. By our 5th year, TechVision had gone public in a highly successful IPO. Though officially I remained anonymous, legally listed in SEC documents only as D.T. Holdings, the company's valuation hit $1 billion. Business magazines speculated about the mysterious founder, with theories ranging from a reclusive genius to a collective of developers operating under a single identity. Meanwhile, to my family, I had finally found some stability with my small design agency. I crafted elaborate stories about my modest successes, occasionally mentioning hiring a freelancer or two to help with larger projects. My parents seemed relieved that I'd finally settled into something sustainable, though they still sent Christmas cards containing $50 gift certificates to grocery stores just in case things get tight. The mental gymnastics required to maintain this fiction became increasingly difficult. During one video call, my mother noticed a designer watch on my wrist, a gift from our board. After a particularly successful quarter, "That looks expensive, Deanne. Are you managing your money properly?" I quickly fabricated a story about it being a knockoff from a street market. "Only $20, Mom. Looks real though, right?" Every family gathering became an exercise in restraint. At my 10-year high school reunion, I endured countless variations of, "Oh, you do websites? That's nice. Have you thought about going back to finance?" From former classmates, while knowing that several of their employers used TechVision software. Jackie Miller, who had barely passed algebra but married a successful dentist, patted my arm consolingly. "It must be so hard with the unstable income. Brad and I just bought our second vacation home in Aspen. If you ever need help finding a real job with benefits, I'm sure Brad could ask around." I smiled tightly and thanked her, excusing myself to the bathroom where I checked my phone to find an email confirming that TechVision had just acquired a smaller competitor for $400 million, pending my final signature. The weight of the lie grew heavier as the years passed. I found myself withdrawing from family events, making excuses to avoid the web of deception I'd created. My parents interpreted this as embarrassment over my perceived lack of success, which only reinforced their concern. "We're just worried about your retirement planning," Dad would say during our monthly calls. "You're 34 now, Deanne. These freelance jobs don't come with 401ks. "I'm putting money away, Dad," I'd assure him, neglecting to mention that my personal wealth had crossed into 9 figures, or that I owned properties in 4 countries. 7 years into my charade, I received a late-night call from my mother. Her voice sounded strained. "Deanne, I'm not supposed to tell you this because Scott made us promise not to worry you, but I think you should know. Your brother lost his job." I sat up straighter in my home office chair. "What happened?" "There was some misunderstanding about a project. Scott says his colleague took credit for his work, then accused Scott of doing the same thing. The company sided with the other person." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I think Scott's boss was intimidated by his potential. Having reviewed enough workplace disputes at TechVision, I doubted that was the full story, but kept my thoughts to myself. I'm sorry to hear that. Is he looking for something new? Yes. But it's been difficult. He says the industry is very political. She hesitated. He's had to move back home temporarily. Your father and I are helping with his mortgage payments until he finds something. After we hung up, I researched what had happened. It didn't take much digging to discover Scott had been terminated for claiming credit for a major software implementation that had been primarily developed by a female colleague. When confronted with evidence, he had apparently tried to blame her instead. His reputation in the Chicago tech scene was damaged. For months afterward, family calls included updates about Scott's job search. He'd had several interviews, but no offers. My parents were increasingly worried about their own finances as they continued supporting him. Then came the news that would change everything. During our weekly call, my mother mentioned casually, "Oh, Scott had an exciting call today. That big company, TechVision, wants to interview him for a senior operations position. Isn't that the one that's always in the business news?" My blood ran cold. TechVision? Are you sure? Yes. He's flying to Seattle next week. Apparently, they have a new headquarters opening in Chicago soon, and they're staffing up. Scott says it's a Fortune 200 company now. Imagine that. My son, potentially working for such an important company. That evening, I received the most unexpected notification from our HR department. The resume of Scott Turner had been flagged for review based on our executive family name monitoring protocol. It was standard procedure to alert me when relatives of C-suite executives applied to prevent nepotism accusations. I sat in stunned silence as I reviewed his application. Scott had applied for a senior vice president position in our operations division, a role reporting directly to Grace with a 7-figure compensation package. His resume contained blatant falsehoods, claiming leadership of projects I knew he hadn't worked on and exaggerating his previous responsibilities. I forwarded the application to Grace with a simple message. "My brother. He doesn't know." Her reply came within minutes. "Holy shit, Dee. What do you want to do?" Before I could decide, another notification arrived. Scott had applied to 5 different positions across TechVision subsidiaries, each application containing different embellishments tailored to the specific role. As I was processing this information, my phone rang. It was Mom again. "Wonderful news, Deanne. Your father and I decided we need a little vacation. We're coming to visit you in Seattle next week. Scott will be there for his big interview, so we thought we'd make it a family trip. We can finally see this apartment you've been in for years. I've always wanted to visit Pike Place Market." My carefully constructed double life was about to collapse around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "They're coming here? Next week?" Grace's voice rose an octave as she paced my actual penthouse, which featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. "To your fake apartment that's basically a stage set?" I sat on my designer couch, head in my hands. "Yes, and Scott's interviewing here, at my company. For a job he's completely unqualified for, using a resume full of lies. This is madness, Dee. It's time to end this. TechVision is worth $4.8 billion. We have 12,000 employees worldwide. We're building a second headquarters in Chicago. You were just included in Forbes' richest self-made women list, even if you did use legal measures to keep your photo and details private." I looked up at her. "You don't understand. They've spent 12 years believing I'm barely getting by. How do I suddenly tell them I've been lying this entire time?" Grace stopped pacing. "They're the ones who dismissed your dreams and abilities. You have nothing to be ashamed of." "It's not shame," I protested. I don't know what it is anymore, but I can't just flip a switch and reveal everything." But reality wasn't giving me a choice. For 3 days, I scrambled to prepare. I stocked the rarely used apartment with fresh food and personal items. I transported enough clothes to make it look lived in. I even created fake client work to leave visibly in progress on the desk. Meanwhile, I instructed our HR department to schedule Scott's interview for Tuesday, knowing my parents wouldn't arrive until Monday evening, buying me at least one night to prepare them. The deception had become so complex that I'd created detailed notes to keep my stories straight. What projects my fictional design agency was currently working on, which fictional clients were problematic, what fictional rates I charged. Looking at these notes spread across my real office, I suddenly saw how absurd it all was. I'd built a global technology company while maintaining an elaborate fiction that I was struggling. Monday evening arrived too quickly. I paced the modest apartment, waiting for my family's Uber to arrive from the airport. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath and opened it to find my parents, looking older than I remembered, and Scott, whose expression of practiced confidence couldn't hide the strain around his eyes. "Deanne," Mom pulled me into a tight hug. "Look at you. Still so thin. Are you eating enough?" Dad hugged me next. The apartment building is nicer than I expected. Good neighborhood. Scott glanced around dismissively. "Cozy," he said, which was clearly code for small. I showed them in, watching their reactions carefully. Mom immediately began examining the space, opening the refrigerator to see if you have proper food, while Dad checked out the view from the windows, nodding approvingly at the partial glimpse of the Space Needle. Scott set his expensive briefcase down. "I have my big interview tomorrow. Senior Vice President at Tech Vision. Pretty impressive, right?" "Very," I said neutrally. "That's a major company." He smirked. "They're Fortune 200 now. Worth billions." The recruiter practically begged me to apply after seeing my LinkedIn profile. Said my experience was exactly what they're looking for. I bit my tongue, knowing our recruiters would never approach candidates that way, especially with his background. Mom emerged from her inspection of my bedroom. "Deanne, this place looks like you barely live here. Where are all your personal touches? Photos? Books?" "I'm minimalist, Mom. Less to clean." Dad sat down on the couch. "So how's the design business these days? Making ends meet?" Before I could answer, Scott interjected. "She's still doing her little websites, Dad. But tonight, we should focus on my opportunity. This position at TechVision would put me in their executive leadership team." "We're so proud," Mom said, patting his arm. "After that awful misunderstanding at your last job, you deserve this break." I suggested we go out to dinner, partly to escape the apartment, but mostly to delay more detailed conversations. As we settled into a mid-priced restaurant I'd carefully selected to match my supposed income level, the questioning began in earnest. "Tell us more about your business, Deanne," Dad said, studying the menu prices with a slight frown. "Your mother and I worry you're not being straight with us about your financial situation." "I'm doing fine, Dad. I have regular clients. The business is stable." Mom reached across the table to pat my hand. "Sweetheart, there's no shame in struggling. You know we're always willing to help." "Actually," Scott interjected, setting down his drink, "after I get this TechVision position, you should apply there too, Dee. They probably need people to update their website or something. Even you could get an interview if I recommend you. The benefits would be much better than your freelance setup." My parents nodded enthusiastically. "That's a wonderful idea," Mom said. "A real company with stability. You've been doing this freelance experiment for what, 12 years now?" Dad added. "Maybe it's time to admit it's not working out the way you hoped and join the corporate world again." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I'd had when they'd dismissed my business ideas years ago. I'd built a company valued at nearly $5 billion, transformed enterprise technology, created thousands of jobs. And yet here they were, still seeing me as a failure in need of rescue. "I appreciate the concern," I said carefully, "but my business is doing better than you think." Scott laughed. "Come on, Dee. You're living in a one-bedroom apartment with IKEA furniture. Meanwhile, TechVision's headquarters has a rock climbing wall and gourmet cafeterias. Their standard compensation packages include stock options worth millions. That's the difference between real success and whatever you're doing. And how do you know so much about TechVision's compensation? I asked, unable to help myself. Research, he said smugly. Unlike some people, I thoroughly prepare before interviews. Did you know their mysterious founder has never made a public appearance? Probably some trust fund kid who got lucky. The actual work is done by serious professionals like the executives I'll be joining. Mom looked at me with concern. Maybe Scott can help you prepare a resume too. I worry about your retirement, Deanne. Freelancers don't get pensions. I excused myself to the restroom, where I stood gripping the sink, staring at my reflection. Tomorrow, Scott would walk into my company, expecting to bluff his way into an executive position with a falsified resume. My parents would continue believing I was barely successful. The weight of 12 years of deception pressed down on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Your brother's interview has been assigned to Marcus in HR. Want me to give any specific instructions? I made a decision. No. Let the process work normally. When I returned to the table, Scott was explaining the salary he expected to negotiate at TechVision, starting at least $300,000, plus bonuses and stock options. By next year, I could be looking at 7 figures total compensation. That's our boy, Dad said proudly, always aiming high. Later that night, after settling my family into their hotel, I returned to my actual penthouse and poured myself a generous glass of wine. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. I just didn't realize how quickly it would all unravel. The next morning, I arrived at TechVision headquarters at 6:30 hours before my family would stir. I'd texted them that I had an early client meeting and would meet them for lunch. In reality, I needed to prepare for the inevitable. Grace met me in my executive office, which featured views of Mount Rainier on clear days. Are you ready for this? Scott's interview is scheduled for 10 o'clock. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, adjusting the photos on my desk, the ones missing from my decoy apartment, showing me with world leaders, cutting ribbons at office openings, receiving industry awards. You could still cancel the interview, Grace suggested. Make up some excuse. I shook my head. No, this has gone on too long. Besides, he's applied to multiple positions with different lies on each application. If I block this one, he'll just try again. At 9:55, my office phone rang. It was security from the lobby. Miss Turner, your 10 o'clock appointment has arrived. Scott Turner, for his SVP interview. Please escort him to the waiting area on 27. I'll handle it from there. Grace raised an eyebrow. You're going to conduct the interview yourself? Bold move. Not exactly. I straightened my designer suit and headed to the executive floor's reception area. When the elevator opened, I saw Scott standing there in his best suit, looking impressed despite himself at the spectacular views and modern design of our headquarters. When he spotted me, confusion crossed his face. Deanne, what are you doing here? I extended my hand professionally. Hello, Scott. I believe you have an interview scheduled. His expression cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and alarm. Are you working here? As a receptionist or something? You should have told me. This is awkward. I maintained my professional demeanor. Let's talk in the conference room. Leading him into our executive boardroom, I watched as he took in the wall of awards, the massive table, and the panoramic city views. Seriously, Dee, what's going on? How did you get access to this room? We could get in trouble. I sat at the head of the table and gestured for him to take a seat. I'm not in trouble, Scott. But we need to discuss your applications to TechVision. Applications. Plural. His face paled slightly. What are you talking about? And how are you involved in my interview process? I placed a folder on the table. You've submitted 5 different resumes to various positions within TechVision and our subsidiaries. Each contains different fabrications about your experience and accomplishments. This is ridiculous, he blustered, though I could see sweat forming on his brow. I'm here for an executive interview. I need to speak with the hiring manager. You are speaking with the hiring manager, I said quietly. And the CEO, and the founder. Scott stared at me for a long moment before laughing nervously. Very funny, Dee. Did you get some temp job here to embarrass me? This isn't the time for your jokes. I opened the folder and spread out his 5 different applications. You claim to have led the Thompson Systems integration at Tecton. But you weren't even on that team. You stated you managed a department of 50 people at NextCore, but you supervised 7 at most. You listed yourself as chief architect of a project you were only tangentially involved with. His face flushed red. How would you know any of that? And what is this? Are you trying to sabotage my chance at a real career because you're jealous? I pressed an intercom button. Grace, would you join us, please? Moments later, Grace entered. Yes, Deanne? Scott looked between us, confusion evident. What's happening right now? Scott. This is Grace Matthews, TechVision's Chief Operating Officer, and my second in command for the past 12 years. Grace nodded professionally. Mr. Turner, I've heard a lot about you. Scott stood abruptly. This is some kind of prank. Or sabotage. My sister has always been jealous of my success, and now she's somehow convinced an employee here to help her ruin my opportunity. I took a deep breath. It's not a prank, Scott. I founded TechVision 12 years ago, after our family told me my ideas were worthless and my dreams were delusional. I've built it into a Fortune 200 company, while all of you believed I was a struggling freelancer. He stared at me, speechless for perhaps the first time in his adult life. I continued. I kept it secret because none of you believed in me. Not once. Instead, you mocked me, belittled me, and pitied me. Scott found his voice, though it had lost its usual confidence. This is impossible. You're making websites for coffee shops. You live in a tiny apartment. You're barely getting by. That apartment is a cover. A stage set I maintain for family visits. I actually live in a penthouse, overlooking the water. I employ 12,000 people worldwide. Our technology is used by over 60% of Fortune 500 companies. I don't believe you, he said, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. Prove it. I gestured toward the wall behind him, where a large photograph showed me shaking hands with the president at a technology summit. Next to it hung the cover of Business Week with the headline, TechVision: How an Anonymous Founder Built a $1 billion Empire. As the truth began to sink in, Scott's expression hardened. So, you've been lying to the entire family for over a decade? Making us worry about you? Letting us think you were struggling while you were secretly wealthy? Do Mom and Dad know? No one knows except Grace. And now you. He barked out a laugh that held no humor. This is rich. You lecture me about lying on my resume while you've been living a complete lie. Does the board of directors know their CEO is a pathological liar? Grace stepped forward. Watch yourself, Mr. Turner. You're speaking to one of the most respected leaders in the tech industry. I raised a hand to stop her. It's okay, Grace. I turned back to Scott. I never lied about my abilities or accomplishments. I simply chose not to share my success with people who didn't believe in me. Scott's shock was transforming into calculation. I could practically see the gears turning as he considered how to use this information to his advantage. Well, this is quite the revelation. I wonder what the business press would make of it. Billionaire CEO. Maintained elaborate deception for years. Not exactly the kind of stability shareholders look for. Are you threatening me? I asked quietly. Not at all, little sister. Just thinking out loud about the implications of your unusual behavior. He straightened his tie. So what happens now? I assume the job is mine? After all, we wouldn't want this strange story getting out. Before I could respond, the door opened again. My parents stood there, looking confused and concerned. Mom clutched her purse nervously. Deanne? The hotel concierge said we might find you here. We tried calling but couldn't reach you. Her eyes darted around the executive boardroom. What is this place? Are you in some kind of trouble? Dad looked equally bewildered. The security guards almost didn't let us up. But when we mentioned we were looking for our daughter Deanne Turner, they got very respectful suddenly. Scott turned to them with a strange expression, part shock, part vindictive delight. Oh, Mom and Dad. Perfect timing. Your struggling freelancer daughter has quite the surprise for you. I stood up, knowing the moment had arrived. There was no more hiding. No more pretending. Mom, Dad, there's something I need to tell you. Please, sit down. They took seats, looking increasingly worried. What's going on, Deanne? Dad asked. Why are you and Scott here? Is this about his interview? I took a deep breath. In a way, yes. Scott applied for a job at my company. I founded TechVision 12 years ago. I'm the CEO and majority shareholder. The company is worth nearly $5 billion. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. Dad's expression was completely blank, as though his brain refused to process my words. That's not possible, Mom finally whispered. You're a web designer. You live in that little apartment. You've been struggling all these years. It was a cover, I said gently. I've been pretending to struggle while building one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the world. Dad's voice was hollow. You've been lying to us? For 12 years? After you all dismissed my business ideas and mocked my dreams, I decided to succeed without your approval or knowledge, I explained. The apartment you visited is just for show. I maintain it for family visits. Scott jumped in, his voice sharp. She's been deceiving all of us while we worried about her, letting us send her money when she's been a billionaire, making a fool of the entire family. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand, Deanne. Why would you do this? Were we such terrible parents that you needed to create this elaborate lie? The hurt in her voice pierced me. But Scott wasn't finished. And now she's trying to block me from getting a job here by claiming my resume has discrepancies. Talk about hypocrisy. Dad looked at Scott. Is that true? Did you lie on your application? Scott waved dismissively. Minor embellishments. Everyone does it. The point is that your daughter has been deceiving you for over a decade. I felt the conversation spiraling out of control. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just wanted to succeed on my own terms. Terms that included letting your parents think you were barely surviving? Dad's voice had an edge I'd rarely heard. Do you know how many nights your mother lay awake worrying about your financial security? How many times we discussed whether we should dip into our retirement savings to help you? The guilt I'd suppressed for years rose up like a wave. I'm sorry. I donated all the money you sent to charities supporting women entrepreneurs. Oh, how generous of you, Scott sneered. The billionaire giving away the pennies her worried parents scraped together. Grace, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. Perhaps this conversation should continue privately. I can show Mr. and Mrs. Turner to your private office, Deanne. Mom stood up shakily. I think we need some time to process this. This is overwhelming. As Grace led my parents out, Scott remained, his expression hardening into something ugly. Well, sister dear, you've certainly orchestrated quite the dramatic revelation. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I met his gaze steadily. What exactly do you want, Scott? His smile was cold. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. After all, we're family, and families help each other, don't they? Even long-lost billionaire sisters who've been lying through their teeth for over a decade. I realized then that the hardest part of this saga wasn't going to be revealing my secret, it was going to be dealing with the aftermath. The next 24 hours unfolded like a fever dream. My parents checked out of their hotel and into a suite I kept for visiting executives, needing space to process the revelation. Scott, meanwhile, switched between outrage at my deception and transparent attempts to leverage the situation to his advantage. "I've been thinking," he said the following afternoon as he paced my actual penthouse living room, "about how we move forward as a family." I sat stiffly on my couch, exhausted from a night of minimal sleep. "I'm listening. Obviously, this news is a shock to all of us. Mom and Dad are devastated by your lack of trust." He paused dramatically. "But I've always been pragmatic. What's done is done. Now we need to think about the future." "The future?" I repeated cautiously. "Exactly. I've spent years developing valuable corporate experience and leadership skills." He straightened his shoulders. "TechVision could benefit from my expertise as, say, Chief Strategy Officer. The market would respond well to having actual family leadership publicly involved in the company." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You want me to make you an executive at my company? After you submitted multiple fraudulent applications?" He waved dismissively. Water under the bridge. This is about family synergy now. Plus, I have several business ideas I've been developing that TechVision could fund. Win-win. "Scott, that's not going to happen." His expression hardened. "Think carefully, Deanne. Your elaborate deception wouldn't look good to your board or your investors. The press would have a field day with it. Billionaire CEO maintains fake apartment and lies to family for years. How stable does that make you look?" The threat was barely veiled. I took a deep breath. "Are you blackmailing me?" "Of course not. I'm offering a mutually beneficial arrangement. Mom and Dad could use some financial support too. Dad's retirement portfolio took a hit in the last downturn, and they've been helping me with expenses during my job transition." "You mean since you were fired for taking credit for someone else's work?" I corrected. His face flushed. "That was a misunderstanding. The point is, as the successful one in the family now, you have a responsibility to help." Before I could respond, my parents arrived. The past day had aged them visibly. Mom's eyes were red, rimmed from crying, and Dad's normally perfect posture was slumped. "We need to talk," Dad said without preamble. As a family, we gathered in my living room, the space suddenly feeling small despite its generous dimensions. Mom kept looking around at the luxury surrounding us, as if trying to reconcile this reality with the struggling daughter she thought she knew. "I still don't understand," she began, her voice quavering. "All these years, when we called to check on you, when we worried about you, when we sent you money for groceries, you were living like this?" She gestured at the panoramic views and designer furniture. "I never meant to hurt you," I said quietly. "It started as a way to prove I could succeed without anyone's approval. And then it just continued." Dad leaned forward. "Do you know what this has done to our family? The trust that's been broken? Your mother and I devoted our lives to supporting our children, and you repaid that with an elaborate, decade-long lie." The guilt was crushing, but Scott jumped in before I could respond. "I've been suggesting to Deanne that we need to move forward constructively. As a family, I've offered to bring my corporate expertise to TechVision in an executive capacity." Mom brightened slightly. "That's a wonderful idea. The two of you working together. We could all be involved in the company." "That's not possible," I said gently. "Scott isn't qualified for an executive position, and nepotism would damage the company's reputation and culture." Scott's expression darkened. "There you go again. dismissing me. Some things never change. Even with all your billions, it's not dismissal, it's reality. TechVision has 12,000 employees who depend on ethical leadership. So you're refusing to help your family? Dad asked, his tone sharp. After deceiving us for 12 years, I felt backed into a corner. I didn't say I wouldn't help. I just can't give Scott an executive position he's not qualified for. Always the perfect one, Scott muttered. Even as a billionaire, you still have to feel superior. This isn't about superiority, I insisted. It's about doing what's right for the company I built. Mom wiped away fresh tears. The company matters more than your family? Is that what you're saying? No, that's not. Because it sounds like after lying to us for 12 years, you're now refusing to help your struggling brother, Dad interrupted. Do you know how much we've sacrificed to support him since he lost his job? We've dipped into our retirement savings while you've been living in luxury. The conversation was spiraling again. I took a deep breath and tried a different approach. I'm willing to help in appropriate ways. I can ensure you're financially secure, Dad. Set up a retirement fund that will provide for both of you. Completely. And what about me? Scott demanded. Your own brother? I met his gaze steadily. I can offer you a legitimate position at TechVision, at an appropriate level for your actual experience and skills, with a standard compensation package. No special treatment, no executive title. His face flushed with anger. That's insulting. I've been in the corporate world building real experience while you've been playing secret billionaire. Building real experience? I echoed incredulously. Is that what you call falsifying your resume and taking credit for other people's work? You're twisting things again. This is exactly why I've always had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. Mom intervened. Please, stop fighting. This is tearing our family apart. Dad shook his head wearily. Deanne, after everything that's happened, your brother deserves a real opportunity. An executive position with appropriate compensation. It's the least you could do to make amends for your deception. I felt a familiar feeling rising in my chest. The same sensation I'd experienced years ago when they'd dismissed my business ideas. Only this time, it wasn't sadness or hurt. It was clarity. I built TechVision from nothing, I said quietly. Despite everyone telling me I would fail, despite being mocked and dismissed, I created something valuable that employs thousands of people and transforms how businesses operate. I won't compromise its integrity or my ethics, even to make amends. Scott stood abruptly. Well, I think we have our answer. Deanne's precious company matters more than her family. Always has. He stormed toward the door, pausing dramatically. By the way, I took the liberty of reaching out to a few business journalists I know. Told them I might have an interesting story about TechVision's mysterious founder. They seemed very interested. The blood drained from my face. You did what? Just keeping my options open, he said with a cold smile. I'm sure they'd be fascinated to hear about your elaborate double life. Might make shareholders nervous about what else you might be hiding. As the door slammed behind him, Mom burst into fresh tears. What has happened to our family? How did we get here? I sat in stunned silence, the full weight of the situation crushing down on me. My brother was threatening to expose my secret to damage my company if I didn't give him what he wanted. My parents saw me as the villain for not capitulating to his demands. After they left to check on Scott, I called Grace in a panic. He contacted journalists, I told her, pacing my living room. He's going to expose everything to punish me. Grace was silent for a moment. Maybe it's time, Dee. Maybe the secret has run its course. But not like this, I protested. Not as some scandalous expose that could damage investor confidence. Then we take control of the narrative, Grace said firmly. We tell the story our way before he can twist it. That night, alone in my penthouse, I faced the hardest decision of my professional life. For 12 years, I'd built my company while hiding my true identity. Partly from a desire for privacy, but mostly from a deep-seated need to prove myself without acknowledgement. Now, I had to choose between maintaining that secret and protecting what I'd built. As dawn broke over the Seattle skyline, I made my decision. I would no longer hide in the shadows. It was time to step into the light, on my own terms. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Grace asked as we reviewed the press release one final time. We sat in my office at TechVision headquarters, the Seattle morning fog gradually burning away outside my windows. "I've never been more certain," I replied, though my stomach churned with anxiety. It's time. For 3 days, I'd worked with our communications team to craft the perfect revelation. Not a scandal, but a story of perseverance, vision, and a woman determined to succeed in an industry that often overlooked female founders. We'd arranged an exclusive interview with a respected business magazine known for thoughtful profiles rather than sensationalism. But first, I had one more family confrontation to face. I'd asked my parents and Scott to meet me at my office. As they were escorted in by my assistant, their expressions ranged from Mom's nervous uncertainty to Dad's guarded wariness to Scott's barely concealed hostility. "Thank you for coming," I began as they took seats across from my desk. "Before I make any public announcements, I wanted to speak with you directly." Scott crossed his arms. "So you've reconsidered my offer?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm announcing my identity as TechVision's founder later today. I'm taking control of the narrative before anyone else can." His face flushed. "You're making a mistake. What I've been making is a series of mistakes for 12 years by not being honest with all of you. That ends today." I took a deep breath and continued. "I built TechVision from nothing but an idea everyone told me would fail. I kept it secret initially because I wanted to prove myself without anyone's approval or disapproval affecting me. As the company grew, the deception became more elaborate and difficult to unwind. I looked at my parents. "I'm deeply sorry for the worry I caused you both. It was never my intention to hurt you. I was wrong to maintain the lie for so long, and I take full responsibility for that." Mom's eyes welled with tears. "We just don't understand why you couldn't trust us with your success." "It wasn't about trust," I explained gently. "It was about needing to find my own path without feeling judged or having my confidence undermined. But I took it too far. And for that, I'm truly sorry." I turned to Scott. "As for you, I'm offering you a legitimate opportunity. Not an executive position you're not qualified for, but a real job with real responsibilities at an appropriate level. You'd be subject to the same performance expectations as any other employee. No special treatment, no shortcuts. And if I refuse," he challenged, "then you refuse. That's your choice. But what I won't do is give you a position you haven't earned or allow you to threaten me or this company." Dad leaned forward. "And what about our retirement, Deanne? After all this deception, I've already set up a trust that will ensure you're both financially secure for the rest of your lives. The paperwork is being drawn up now. It's not contingent on anything. It's simply the right thing to do." Scott stood abruptly. "This is your final offer? A entry-level position for me and a guilt payment to Mom and Dad?" "It's not entry-level, Scott. It's mid-management, commensurate with your actual experience. And it's not a guilt payment. It's financial security for our parents." He laughed bitterly. "Always the perfect daughter, even when you've been living a complete lie. I'm far from perfect. I made a serious mistake in not being honest with all of you. I'm trying to make amends in an appropriate way. By humiliating me? Offering me some pity position beneath my qualifications?" I stood to face him. "No. By offering you a legitimate opportunity that matches your actual experience and skills. The position requires honesty and integrity, which means coming clean about the falsehoods on your applications." "You're asking me to admit I lied?" he sputtered. "I'm asking you to start fresh, with honesty. I've admitted my deception. Can you admit yours?" For a moment, genuine conflict flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened again. "This isn't over," he stormed out, leaving my parents looking shell-shocked in his wake. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "He's just upset. He's always been sensitive about measuring up." I sighed. "I know. But I can't compromise the integrity of my company. Even for family." Dad studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You really built all this yourself? From nothing?" "Yes, every bit of it." A long silence stretched between us before he finally spoke again. "I guess we underestimated you. I'm still angry about the deception, but I'm also proud of what you've accomplished." It was the first time in my adult life I'd heard those words from him. Something tight in my chest began to loosen slightly. 2 hours later, the press release went out, and my exclusive interview was published online simultaneously. TechVision founder reveals identity. How Deanne Turner built a billion-dollar empire, read the headline. The story told the truth. About building the company from nothing. About choosing to remain anonymous to focus on the technology rather than personality. About finally deciding to step into the public eye to inspire other women entrepreneurs. It mentioned nothing about family deception or Scott's threats. The business world erupted with excitement and speculation. TechVision stock dipped initially as the markets processed this unexpected revelation. But by closing bell, it had rallied to finish higher than it opened as analysts praised the company's fundamentals and my track record. What the press didn't know was that in a quiet corner of a Seattle restaurant that evening, I sat across from my parents, beginning the long, difficult process of rebuilding trust and understanding. "I kept every card and letter you sent," I told them. "Every check you mailed to help with groceries went to a foundation supporting women starting businesses without family support." Mom reached across the table to take my hand. "We should have believed in you from the beginning. We were so focused on security and practicality that we couldn't see the brilliance of your vision." Dad nodded slowly. "I spent my entire career playing it safe. Maybe I pushed that on you too hard, because I was afraid to take risks myself. Healing would take time, but it had begun." Scott remained distant, refusing my calls and declining the job offer. I left the door open, hoping that time might soften his anger. 6 months later, TechVision had weathered the revelation successfully. If anything, our brand had strengthened with my story inspiring entrepreneurs across the country. I'd established a foundation dedicated to supporting women in technology from unsupportive backgrounds, turning my painful experience into something constructive. To my surprise, I received a text from Scott one Tuesday afternoon. "Can we meet?" "Alone." We met at a quiet coffee shop near his new apartment. He looked different, humbler somehow. Less polished but more authentic. "I've been in therapy," he said without preamble. "Turns out I have some issues with competition and self-worth." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That's good. That you're working on things." He nodded, eyes fixed on his cup. "I declined your job offer because I needed to earn something on my own terms. I found a position at a smaller tech firm. Entry-level, but legitimate." "I'm glad, Scott. I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for threatening you and the company. That was wrong." The simple apology meant more than I could express. "Thank you. That means a lot. Mom and Dad seem happier now," he added. "Dad's actually taking guitar lessons with that retirement fund you set up. Said he always wanted to learn." I smiled. Music was always his secret passion. As we parted ways, Scott hesitated. "I'm not ready to be one big happy family yet, but maybe we can start with not being enemies." It was a beginning. Not an ending wrapped in a perfect bow, but a genuine step toward healing. The following week, I visited our foundation's first mentoring session. 20 young women, most from backgrounds where their dreams had been dismissed, sat listening intently as I shared my journey. The mistakes along with the triumphs. One quiet girl raised her hand. What would you do differently if you could go back? I thought carefully before answering. I would have found the courage to be authentic sooner. Success built on deception, even when it feels justified, creates a prison of its own. True freedom comes from living your truth, even when it's difficult. Looking out at their eager faces, I felt something I hadn't expected. A sense of purpose beyond building technology or accumulating wealth. My journey, with all its complications, might help these young women navigate their own paths with more wisdom than I had shown. Later that evening, standing on my penthouse balcony watching the sunset paint Seattle's skyline in gold and crimson, I realized that the secret I'd kept for 12 years had taught me something invaluable. Our worth isn't determined by others' validation, but our joy is multiplied when we can share our authentic selves with those who learn to truly see us. I no longer needed to hide. My success wasn't diminished by my family's initial doubt, just as their love wasn't conditional on my achievements. We were all learning, slowly and imperfectly, to meet each other as we truly were. The empire I'd built would continue to grow and evolve. But more importantly, so would I. Have you ever kept parts of yourself hidden because you feared others wouldn't understand or approve? What would happen if you finally revealed your true self? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their dreams are valid, regardless of who believes in them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, success without authenticity is just another form of failure in disguise.